chapter 20 rather. In chapter 20, the Lord lays out all of the penalty. He lays out penalties concerning specific sins, and most of which have been addressed in chapters 18 and 19. And so He lays out now, here's the penalty for these things that He has prohibited. And some of these, you read these penalties as we would read them today, seemingly very, very harsh. But God lays out these very harsh penalties because it was essential to prevent sin from infecting the community life of God's people. He didn't want any of these sins to have any influence among His people, period. And He knows how destructive they are. So He said, anybody takes and defies my word on these issues and goes against these things, and they elevate their own personal desires for sin and their love for evil and all, that they're willing to jeopardize the purity and the holiness of a whole nation, He said, I want you to remove that influence. And He wasn't afraid to do that. Additionally, very important to understand, in terms of the strength, most of these, it is a death penalty for these sins. Additionally, we need to understand about the children of Israel in the Old Testament. God had a very important plan attached to their life, and that is He's going to bring the Savior of the world in through them, into the world. So if they get drawn away into all of the religion of the Canaanites, they get absorbed by the world and all, then God doesn't have a holy people to bring the Messiah, to bring Jesus into the world through. So you've got things where somebody comes in and says, I don't care about God, I don't care about God's plan, I don't care about the Messiah, I don't care about the Jews, all I care about is just doing what my body wants to do. And God says, no, we're not going to put up with that. And I'll remove that influence from among my people. And so they were to be taken out so that the children of Israel wouldn't God's plan wouldn't be destroyed through them. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, again you shall say to the children of Israel, whoever of the children of Israel or of the strangers who dwell in Israel, who gives any of his descendants to Molech, he shall surely be put to death. And as we remember, Molech was a god of the Ammonites, and they would heat this statue up, a terracotta or metal, and it would be placed in a fire, and they would throw their babies into the arms of Molech. So it was a child sacrifice. God says, anybody does that kind of thing among my people, capital sin, capital crime, they're to be put to death. Here's the means of death. The people of the land shall stone him with stones. And I will set my face against that man, and I will cut him off from his people, because he has given some of his descendants to Molech to defile my sanctuary and profane my holy name. God says, you profane my holy name by doing this, because if you do this, offer your babies and sacrifice them, in this way, you're communicating to the whole world that this is what your God is like. See, that's the responsibility of holiness. There's the privilege of living a holy life, but the responsibility is that people are coming to conclusions about our God as they watch our lives. And God knows that. He never loses sight of that. And so He's saying, you do this kind of thing, and then people are going to come to the natural conclusion that that's what your God is about, and I am not about this. So He's got a zero tolerance on this thing. And if the people of the land should in any way hide their eyes from the man who has done this, I didn't see anything. Did you see anything? What Uncle Vinny did? I don't know what. And they don't want to step up and do what God told them to do in stoning such a person. God says, if they hide their eyes from the man when he gives his descendants to Molech, and they do not kill him, God says, then I'll take it into my own hands. I will set my face against that man and against his family, and I will cut him off from his people, and all who prostitute themselves with him to commit harlotry with Molech. And the person who turns to mediums and familiar spirits to prostitute himself with them, I will set my face against that person, and cut him off from among his people. Again, a capital sin here. Consecrate yourself, therefore, and be holy, for I am the Lord your God. And you shall keep my statutes and perform them. I am the Lord who sanctifies you. For everyone who curses his father or his mother shall surely be put to death. That was a capital crime. And he has cursed his father or his mother, his blood shall be upon him. Now, remember in the giving of this law, that this law, as Moses gave it to the people, this would be the context of the whole nation. I mean, you would have virtually no rebellion against parental authority among that nation. Children were raised in that. That was the standard for the nation. So for a kiddo to come up and then start cursing their parents and living in rebellion to their parents, I mean, they would be sinning against a standard that they were very familiar with and everybody else was familiar with. You couldn't take this and enact it in the United States of America. So sometimes people look, it's a different covenant. It's the Old Testament. It's a theocracy. The United States is not a theocracy. So we're looking at principles for our lives. You enact that today and you've wiped out 3 generations of Americans. And I'm not saying that the disrespect that is nurtured and encouraged by the entertainment industry and other, vehicles, the disrespect for parents that's encouraged among children is all right, but it is apples and oranges here a little bit. And so this thing wouldn't be a thing where someone would say, wow, they were raised in this terrible rebellion, exposed to all these terrible things as a kid, and then one day they did this and someone took them out and stoned them to death. That's not the context that it would have happened in. So, the man who commits adultery with another man's wife, he who commits adultery with his neighbor's wife, the adulterer and the adulteress shall surely be put to death. Now that's fascinating also, because you remember in John's Gospel, when Jesus was teaching in the temple, we're told, and these religious leaders brought a woman, they're dragging her along, and they cast her into the midst. They interrupt Jesus' teaching and say, here is this woman, we caught her in the very act of adultery. The law of Moses says she's to be stoned to death. What do you say? And they're trying to trick Jesus and trap him here. The fact that they only brought the woman. When you catch people in the very act, you got the man and the woman. But they only bring the woman. And the reason they only bring the woman is they are not concerned at all about the law of Moses. If they were concerned about the law of Moses, they'd have brought both the man and the woman. They're just interested in trapping Jesus. And so it gives us a little insight into that incident. The man who lies with his father's wife, his stepmother, has uncovered his father's nakedness. Both of them shall surely be put to death. Their blood shall be upon them. If a man lies with his daughter-in-law, both of them shall surely be put to death. They have committed perversion. Their blood shall be upon them. If a man lies with a male as he lies with a woman, so homosexual sex, I'm not talking about homosexual tendencies, talking about homosexual sex, both of them have committed an abomination. They shall surely be put to death. Their blood shall be upon them. If a man marries a woman and her mother, it is a wickedness. They shall be burned with fire, and both he and they, that there may be no wickedness among you. And the idea is that they would be first stoned to death, and then their bodies would be burned, so that there would be no even the slightest reminder or remainder of their sin among the nation. So the ashes would just be gone. If a man mates with an animal, he shall surely be put to death. You shall kill the animal. If a woman approaches an animal and mates with it, you shall kill the woman and the animal. They shall surely be put to death. Their blood is upon them. To be forewarned is to be forearmed. Everyone would be responsible for their actions. If a man takes his sister, and this would be a stepsister, his father's daughter or his mother's daughter, and sees her nakedness. It's not that they were both 8 years old and, they saw someone coming out of the bathroom or something. It's talking about sexual intercourse here. And she sees his nakedness. It's a wicked thing. And they shall be cut off in the sight of their people. And he has uncovered his sister's nakedness. He shall bear his guilt. Now, there's some debate whether this punishment refers to a death sentence or it refers to banishment from being able to be among the covenant people. They'd be separated from the children of Israel because it talks of them being cut off in the sight of their people. If a man lies with a woman during her sickness, during her period, and uncovers her nakedness, he has exposed her flow, and she has uncovered the flow of her blood. Both of them shall be cut off from their people. Again, we don't know whether it refers to a death sentence or a banishment and excommunication from among the children of Israel. The issue is not her period. The issue is not that thing. The issue is that God has forbidden this, and the man says, I don't care what God has said. I don't care what He forbids or what He commands. I'm going to do what I want. That's the leaven. That's the thing that God wanted to have cut out. That thing of, I'm going to elevate my desires, my will, whatever I want to do above God's commandments. And the problem when a person does that is they come in and say, well, I'll justify it here in what looks like a relatively smaller sin. The problem is you justify it there because of the fallen nature of man. Then the next thing is you look and say, what's the next law where God's command doesn't make sense to our flesh, and then the fight begins on that, whether God is right or wrong there, and it moves on, and pretty soon you've got an overthrow of God's law among His people. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your mother's sister, nor your father's sister, your aunt, for that would uncover his near of kin. They shall bear their guilt. If a man lies with his uncle's wife, he has uncovered his uncle's nakedness. They shall bear their sin. They shall die childless. And God takes that upon Himself to make sure that happens. We look at it and say, well, that doesn't seem like, in light of everything else, a terribly great kind of a punishment that they would die childless. It was a huge thing in that culture. For your name to die in the history of the nation, it would not move forward. And so this would be considered by them to be a very grave consequence for their sin. If a man takes his brother's wife, it is an unclean thing. He has uncovered his brother's nakedness. They shall be childless. And you shall therefore keep all my statutes, all my judgments, and perform them, that the land where I am bringing you to dwell may not vomit you out. And you shall not walk in the statutes of the nation which I am casting out before you, for they commit all these things, and therefore abhor them. So you look and say, why does God have to say these things? It's so graphic and sometimes so obvious and all. It wasn't. They're heading into a land where all this stuff was going on. But I have said to you, you shall inherit their land, and I will give it to you to possess, a land flowing with milk and honey. I am the Lord your God who has separated you from the peoples. God called them to be separated. He said, what I'm taking you into, if you stay holy, is going to be fabulous. There's the blessings of holiness. You shall therefore distinguish between clean animals, unclean, between unclean birds and clean, and you shall not make yourselves abominable by beast or by bird, nor by any kind of living thing that creeps on the ground, which I have separated from you as unclean. And then here it is again, and you shall be holy to me, for, that's a because word, a reason word, I, the Lord, am holy, and have separated you from the peoples, that you should be mine. And so we're to be holy because we belong to Him. And then a man or a woman who is a medium or who has has familiar spirits, so they're connected, deliberately connected with the occult, shall surely be put to death. They shall stone them with stones. Their blood shall be upon them. And so we'll stop there this evening and introduce communion.